climate crisis. If we thought COVID was something, this is going to be the challenge of our generation, and I'm here today to make the case to you that actually paediatricians need to be at the absolute forefront of the action on climate. So I'm Katie Knight, I'm a paediatric emergency medicine consultant and I work at North Middlesex Hospital. I'm also chairing one of the subgroups of the newly formed RCPCH climate change working group, which I'll talk a little bit more about as we go through the talk. So let's get started. So the climate crisis is already here. This is not something that's going to affect our kids or our grandchildren. It's already affecting us and our lives. It's already affecting our world. So we're already seeing ecological and climate breakdown. This is not a future problem. This is a now problem. So it's affecting all over the world. We have flooding, flash flooding in the UK. We have extreme droughts in Africa and the Middle East. We have wildfires burning in Australia. We have wildfires burning in America. And the bottom left picture is the town in Canada, which last week recorded a record temperature of 49 degrees. And then within 24 hours later, was consumed by a huge wildfire. So, as I say, this is not a future problem. This is a now problem, and it's something that we need to act on immediately. How do we get into this mess? So it's all to do with CO2. And we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that CO2 is man-made, man-produced, and is a greenhouse gas, which is trapping heat within the atmosphere. And that is what is driving all of this. The science is absolutely clear on this. So this shows the average CO2 reading since the 1960s when records began. And in May of this year was the highest CO2 ever recorded in the atmosphere. So humans alive today are breathing more CO2 than it's ever been breathed on record. And we're still producing more of it with all the fossil fuels we produce and burn every single day. So things are changing in terms of society. People have suddenly, within the last few years, woken up to the existential threat of climate change. So we have been given figures like there's 12 years to stop the climate catastrophe. We've had Greta Thunberg, who, to all her credit, has spawned a worldwide movement with the Fridays for Future schools striking for climate change. We've had Extinction Rebellion in 2019 pretty much shut down the centre of London. So it's really on the radar for a lot of people, and it's causing a lot of people a lot of concern, which rightly it should do. And even the Lancet, the world's biggest medical journal, has now started producing an annual report tracking the progress on health and climate change. So it's a health problem, not an environmental problem. And that's why paediatricians need to be absolutely at the front of this. Unfortunately, the balance so far has been a little bit more towards the young people doing the work and the older people kind of sitting there and hoping that the adults are somehow going to come along and save us. I'm here to say that we are the adults and it's our responsibility. We've let the children lead, which all credit to them of getting this on our radar. But now it's time for us to step in and really take things seriously. It's a medical emergency that we're trying to deal with here. What's the connection between environment and health? So this, I think, quite nicely demonstrates the things that we're concerned about. So in the centre circle, you can see what is illustrated there is the CO2 level rising, causing rising temperatures, causing more extreme weather conditions, and causing sea level rise as the Arctic ice caps melt. The middle circle shows the consequences of those things. So things from extreme heat to air pollution, to changes in vector ecology, to increasing allergens, to impacts on the water and food supply. And on the outside, you can see the way that these things affect human health. So we know already that extreme heat increases heat-related illness and death and is linked to cardiovascular and respiratory failure. We already see the effects of air pollution in London, so increasing risk of asthma and cardiovascular disease. We've had the first child death linked to air pollution, and this is directly related to climate change. Then there's things that you might not have thought about before, so things like when vector ecology changes, it means that hotter temperatures mean that endemic diseases from the tropics might spread to other areas of the world and not be expected. And then you have the impacts on food and water supply. So crop failures are becoming more common. And as crop failures become more common, people are forced out of the places where they live. Migration occurs and civil unrest can occur as well. So all of these things have been seen already. This is not hypothetical. This is happening, and it is happening now. So why do paediatricians need care even more than the average person? So the WHO estimates that 88% of the disease burden associated with climate change will affect those aged under 5. So things like malnutrition, things like air pollution, things like food and water shortage supply will obviously be worse for anybody who is younger, but also this takes into account the effect over their whole lifetime. So they are going to deal with the increasing effects of climate change, which are going to multiply over the course of their lifespan. Climate change, and I'm very glad we've just been talking about inequality, because climate change is a social and racial inequality issue. So everybody in the global south, children especially, will be more affected by climate change than we are to start with, as the temperatures increase in that area before they're going to increase in the northern hemisphere. So not only in the global south, but within our own country. So if you just think about the effects of extreme weather, the effects of food shortage and food scarcity, those things are going to hit the people who are most socioeconomically deprived first, before they hit the richer people. So it's going to widen the gap between the richer and poorer. And there's also been calculations that loss in GDP could be double the effect of the coronavirus pandemic. So this is a really significant economic and health issue. So with all of this going on and all the dire effects on health, you'd expect that hopefully we wouldn't be doing too much to contribute as a health system to climate change. Unfortunately, that's not true. So as well as being expected to deal with the health effects of climate change, we also have responsibility for causing some of these effects by the amount of carbon that we emit through the system. So some facts and figures: the NHS carbon footprint is more than all the flights out of Heathrow in a year. Air pollution currently kills 40,000 people in the UK each year, but the NHS is responsible for 5% of all road journeys. And if healthcare was a country, it would be the 5th largest emitter of carbon in the world. So we're not quite without blame here. So where are the carbon hotspots in healthcare? This depends very much on the type of healthcare that's being provided. So primary care will have very different carbon hotspots to acute care and specialist care. So for example, this just shows that within primary care, the real hotspots are pharmaceuticals, including prescriptions, whereas in acute trusts, which perform a lot of surgery, it'll be medical instruments and equipment, which really is responsible for a lot of the carbon footprint, as well as heating and providing water to a very large hospital, that kind of thing. So this is quite interesting here. So this graph got a few different coloured lines. So if you take a look at the pink line at the top, this is a projection of the carbon emissions of the UK up until 2050. If we were to do nothing, the pink line would be the trajectory that we follow. The orange line at the bottom is the trajectory that the Climate Change Act would like us to follow. So if we cut emissions by the current UK government's targets, we would be down to minus 80% of what we're currently emitting. Where healthcare comes into this, so the whole green wedge, all of those tiny green wedges within the big green wedge, they are opportunities for the healthcare system to cut carbon. And this is our responsibility. So there's about 30% of the full wedge that's expected of cutting emissions from the public sector is our responsibility as the healthcare sector to find those emissions cuts. So this includes things like moving to less intensive models of care, reducing anaesthetic gas use, because anaesthetic gases are, many of them, greenhouse gases, increasing our efficiency with buildings, and also reducing our travel for patients and staff. So designing services more intelligently and moving towards more e-consultations, for example. So a lot of work to do. The good news about this is the sustainability actually benefits all of us. It can be cheaper, although there might be an initial spend. It encourages better use of resources and fairer use of resources. It encourages us to keep our populations healthy and to prevent disease, because actually the best way to cut the carbon cost of care is to reduce the care that is necessary to give. So a healthier population will need to use health services less, and health services which use less are going to use less carbon. This also encourages collaboration with communities, because we can't do all of this by ourselves. So cooperation between local government partners, etc., is really the way forward. The other good news is that sustainability is a rapidly growing movement. So you're not on your own if you're trying to do something in a bit more of a sustainable way. So the medical community has started to really take serious action, and there are various medical organisations around the UK which are doing some really important work. So, for example, the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare has really spearheaded the drive towards sustainable QI, whereas MedAct, which some of you may be members of, is really spearheading the environmental and social justice aspects of this. NHS Trusts and Royal Colleges are also following the lead. So there have been a few NHS Trusts in the country which have gone on to declare a climate emergency. And the point of doing that is the board has recognised that this is a significant health problem that's caused by climate that they have a responsibility to try and help solve. So Newcastle NHS Trust was the first to declare a climate emergency. Gloucestershire Hospitals also has, as has North Bristol, and there are several more in the pipeline, and hopefully North Middlesex soon, if I have anything to do with it. Royal Colleges are also becoming on board. So RChem was the first to declare a climate emergency. The RCGP have taken a strong lead as well. And I'm very glad to say that as of last year, RCPCH declared a climate emergency. And the action that they are taking, we are taking as a college, is to create a climate change working group and eventually to integrate climate change activism into the Royal College business as usual. So this is just an overview of the RCPCH Climate Change Working Group. So there are 5 work streams going on. I'm chairing the work stream which is advocating for change, which is looking at what activism as a Royal College looks like and what we should be pushing for. There is a work stream into research on the climate change impact on children, because that is, the evidence is somewhat lacking in some areas, which we think we can really help with from a scientific point of view. Work stream 3 is about the college itself, and making sure that the college practices and the building and everything that we do, including conferences and events, is as sustainable as possible. Work stream 4 is support for members, so this will include things like education and support in terms of sustainability and QI. And work stream 5 is really important. This is the international work stream. So we cannot forget that although climate change is a universal problem, it's going to affect all children in the world, and the deprived countries are more likely to be affected first. And we have a responsibility to share our knowledge and our activism and to help uplift everybody in this. So the work stream that I'm involved in is about activism, and we really wanted to have some big principles as to how we're going to move forward. So we're very much in the early stages of having conversations about which direction we think things would go in, but what we have drilled down is that we have 6 principles by which we're going to act as a work stream. So the first of them is think big. We are very keen that it's not about personal responsibility and personal actions. I think a lot of the time governments and big companies kind of think that they're getting off the hook because they say, oh, think about your carbon footprint. How could you drive less? How could you recycle more? Actually, it's not about that. It's about the bigger actions, and it's about the big things that can come from the top. So We don't want to be distracted by the small things. We want to go directly to the top and ask for the big things that will make the big differences, which is part of being bold as well. So we can't be afraid to challenge people who are using outdated ways of thinking. We're going to use the evidence. So we're all scientists. We come from a scientific background. We need to use the evidence and be very clear in our communication with our members, with the media, with our communities, that climate change is an issue and it's the scientific basis behind it, and that's how we're going to act. Being the adults our young people need. So eco-anxiety is a thing amongst our young people. We have a responsibility as the ones in power and the ones with the ability to change things at the moment, that we need to take those actions and not rely on them and their activism and just say, oh, we hope things will get better when you're older. We need to take action right now. Thinking creatively. So we've got ourselves into this world by thinking a certain way. The old ways are not working. So we need to think new and creatively and take inspiration from different sources. And also to collaborate. So we know that as the RCPCH, we're not the experts in everything. We are the experts in child health, but that's where our power will come, by collaborating with environmental groups and political groups and other activism groups to really come together and produce something very powerful. So lots of people, when I talk to them about this, say, actually, I'm a doctor, I'm not an environmentalist, what's it got to do with me? I would argue that your activism and advocacy as a paediatric doctor are absolutely crucial in this fight against climate change. So doctors have historically been part of public health actions that have had wide-ranging effects. So, you know, from hundreds of years of activism over clean water, vaccinations, smoking. So when doctors stand up for things, it really matters. And the fight of our generation is going to be climate change. So we are part of national and global networks. We hold multiple roles. So we're citizens, we're leaders, we're community voices, we're generally good communicators. And we have that responsibility to communicate with our colleagues, our communities, our patients about the importance of this, and also advocate at a political level that things need to change. At the bottom of all of this, the climate crisis is a health crisis, so you absolutely do have the credentials to talk about this. So these are the things that I think we should be doing. We need to educate ourselves, first of all, so we have the authority to talk about these things. We need to educate our communities, our patients, our colleagues. Our actions can take the form of advocacy, quality improvement, which I'll touch on briefly. A collective activism is necessary in this. So it's not all about the individual activism. We're stronger when we act together. And we need to prepare. So we need to be aware of what's happening in the future, how climate change is going to affect our patients, our health force, our health service and our workforce. We need to speak up. We need to speak truth to power. We need to amplify young people's voices, and we need to make changes wherever we can, departmental, local, national level. So all of those things we will hopefully help to facilitate through the RCPCH Climate Change Working Group. So sustainable quality improvement is something that I'd like you all to go away and have a look at. We all have to do quality improvement. There's no reason why it can't all be sustainable. So sustainable value talks about the triple bottom line, which is environmental plus social plus financial impact. And if all of this is integrated into all of our quality improvement projects, we could have a huge effect on a national level. So the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare runs online courses, which I highly recommend that everybody goes on. So some obstacles people come across when they start to talk about sustainability is, oh, it's a bit costly. Oh, I'm not sure I understand about that. Oh, the department says we can't do that. There's always an entry point. So I think that this comes under thinking a bit creatively, but everybody will have an entry point where, whether or not the initial motivation to do something is because of climate change, there are certainly other benefits to anything that you do in this sphere. So whether it's waste, whether it's saving money, whether it's improving the reputation of your organisation, whether it's the legacy that you leave behind, whether it's safety and quality, those basic parts of quality improvement, there's always something that you can get in and edge towards. Okay, so in summary, the climate crisis is a health crisis. We have to be the adults, and our young people need us right now. Sustainability can be put at the centre of all QI projects, and this is probably the easiest thing that we can do as paediatricians to start off our sustainability journey. If you're not getting anywhere, then there'll be another entry point. You just need to find it. But without action, there isn't any hope. So just to touch on hope quickly. So hope is not a passive word the way that I'm talking about it. So it's not enough that we hope for a better future. Hoping for a better future means that we actually have to take action into our own hands. We only can have hope if we're engaged in action. Optimism is a passive word, but hope, there is reason for hope if we take action. And these are reasons to be hopeful as well. So we're not alone in this, and there are reasons that we can think that things may be better in the future if we're all acting together. So we have technology that's improving. So solar panels and battery storage technology is something that we never would have dreamed of 20 years ago. Economics are advancing, so things like that are becoming much cheaper, more affordable. Policy is maturing. You only have to look at what Joe Biden is doing in America. So there's some really progressive green policy coming along, and hopefully our political system will follow in the future. Activism is absolutely blossoming. So in all corners of life, it's totally on the radar. Public opinion is shifting. So it is rare to find someone nowadays who denies that climate change is happening and it's a problem that we need to do something about. Culture change is totally possible, and that's partly because public opinion is shifting, and healthier lives are achievable. And this should underscore everything that we do as paediatricians, because if we tackle this as a health crisis and a public health crisis, we have a lot to be hopeful for, and a lot to be hopeful for better lives for our patients. Okay, so things to do right now. Introduction to Sustainable Healthcare is the course that I mentioned, which I highly recommend that you book onto. There's also a free e-learning for healthcare, environmentally sustainable healthcare module. And you can also get involved with the RCPCH Climate Change Advocacy Group. There's a link on the website, or email either me or ccwg@rcpch.ac.uk. And I'm happy to talk about any questions either on or offline.
Thank you so much. That was just such a fascinating talk. I'm feeling really inspired to go out and be an advocate for climate change and save the world. I think probably, like a lot of people listening, I don't think I'd ever quite realised just how big the NHS's carbon footprint is, because obviously we know it's a massive employer, we know it's a huge part of our economy, but I think we don't necessarily think about the implication of that, of being such a big system. And also, I think you're right that it's really important as paediatricians that there's no future for our children if there's no future for the world. And so that is something that we need to kind of, it is our job, and it is our responsibility just as much as everybody else's, to think about what the future is going to look like. I'm sure there's probably lots of people with interesting thoughts and questions. Does anyone want to ask any questions?
Could you just share those contact details in the chat, please, from your last slide?
Of course.
I'll also send those details out in an email as well, Katie. I normally do.
I can send the slides out in an email as well.
If you send them to me, I can send them out to everyone. I'd send an email to all the college tutors and trust reps and everyone after these meetings, so they can get that from there.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are surprised by the carbon footprint of the NHS. and a lot of, but even, you know, at chief exec level, they will be surprised at the carbon footprint that their organisation is generating. But it's really powerful for doctors in an organisation to actually go to their medical director, to go to their chief exec, to say, I care about this. It's a massive problem. It's going to become a massive problem for you if we don't do something about this, because there's no chief exec out there who doesn't want to make the hospital more efficient, make people use their services minimally and efficiently, and if we don't tackle the health problems that climate change is going to cause, then we're in real trouble as a health service.
I had a question, Katie.
Yeah.
Thanks for that amazing talk, by the way. Inspiring and terrifying in equal measures, I think. When you talked about trusts that had declared a climate emergency, what does that mean in kind of practical terms? What are they doing differently to other healthcare organisations? Sorry if you could cover that.
Yeah, so you're right. So if you declare a climate emergency, it has to come with action, right? So anybody can declare a climate emergency. You can declare a climate emergency as a private citizen. There's websites on which you can do that. But then it obviously comes with responsibilities and actions. So the trusts which are doing this the best, having declared a climate emergency, they have then published their green plan. They generally have a sustainability manager whose full-time job is to look after sustainability in the trust and everything that pertains to sustainability. Within their green plan, they have published their carbon footprint, and they have published a very detailed strategy for how they're going to reduce their carbon footprint and how they're going to measure themselves against their targets every year, and that's continually reviewed. And so they are, and once they have something like that in place, they're then able to do some quite exciting things. So Gloucester Hospital, for example, were able to apply for £13 million of funding from the Public Sector Decarbonisation Fund, which will go into things like improved heating systems and solar panels, etc. So yes, it's not just words, it has to be actions, and it has to be backed up by people who really care about what they're doing and know about what they're doing.
Brilliant, thank you. And who declares it? Is it the CEO who declares it, or is it kind of an organisational thing?
So it generally has to be done via the board. So the trust exec will have to declare something like that, because obviously it has massive implications for how the hospital is run and the strategic goals of the organisation.
Thank you.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, Katie, nice to see you. Yeah. I thought my question was going to be answered by the last questioner, but actually there were a couple of other things there. So, I mean, I work at St George's, as you well know, and I asked the chief exec about this, and the chief exec told me that we were the biggest polluter in the whole of Wandsworth, which sounds absolutely terrible. And even told me the number of tons of CO2 that we were pumping into the air every year. But we are also the largest business by like a factor of 5 or something in Wandsworth, so it's not kind of surprising. So you kind of rapidly get lost in the scale here. But my question to you is that, so St George's, I don't believe it has declared a climate emergency. I'm going to find out after this. But actually, you know, how I can't tell the chief exec to do that, but how practically do you get the hospital to do a climate emergency rather than just carrying on as normal?
Well, my question is, why can't you ask the chief exec to do that? Because that's the only way that it has happened in other trusts, is by clinicians actually stating how important it is and making a case to the exec. So we're sort of in that process at North Middlesex at the moment, where we have a bunch of interested people who've formed the sustainability group. We've written papers to board explaining the importance of this and the impact for the local community, and that's at the stage of kind of being discussed. So actually it does at some point come down to somebody asking for it and being quite vocal about it, and really putting forward the case for why it's a mutual benefit to the hospital and the community.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions? I know one of the things that I've been kind of thinking about during COVID is obviously I think a few people have been sort of mentioning the huge amount of single-use plastics that have come out of PPE. I don't know, I mean, as someone who's not very clever in these kind of things, whether the idea of using biodegradable plastics in PPE in the future is even a possibility, whether it would meet standards and things. But something that's always bothered me about hospitals, even before the pandemic, was how many plastic aprons and plastic gloves and plastic whatever we go through in a day, and how many things just go in the bin that probably could have been recycled or reused.
Yeah, and there's many companies out there trying to form solutions to the PPE issue. It's massive at the moment. So we're on something like 1.7 billion disposable face masks since the start of the pandemic, each of which takes 400 years to decompose, or if it gets incinerated, it leaks horrible chemicals into the atmosphere, or it just sits and pollutes our pavements and our beaches and all the rest of it. So yes, PPE is a massive problem. There are companies working on biodegradable solutions. There are companies which are probably a little bit further ahead, working on reusable and a circular economy in terms of PPE. So cloth PPE, which can be properly laundered to hospital standards, and then at the end of its life cycle turned into something else and recycled properly with a carbon neutral life cycle overall. But yes, yeah, PPE is a huge issue. There's other things going on. So for example, in the operating theatres, there are some hospitals which are using incineration machines which can take, for example, the theatre wraps and melt them down and make plastic bricks out of them, and those plastic bricks can be used by different companies to make different things, including medical equipment trays, things like that. So there are solutions, there are people working on these problems, but there can't be enough people working on these problems. So yeah.
I can see Kate Damaraja was trying to ask you a question, but she's lost her signal, but she's put it in the chat for us. She said, how can we share resources, e.g. the templates for the report that you drew up to present to your exec? So is there some news?
There's a better thing that I can share than that. I'm very happy for anybody to read the report that I wrote for our exec. However, there's another resource which is probably more useful for you. So the organisation Health Declares a Climate Emergency has produced a document which is how to declare a climate emergency, and it basically takes you through step by step what you would need to do to convince your organisation to take that forward. So I'll share that as well if I can find the link to it.
That'd be great, thank you. Does anyone else have any final questions and comments? No, if not, well, thank you so much, Katie. That was really, really interesting and really inspiring. It's definitely given me quite a lot to think about. That was really lovely to hear from you. Moving on to our final kind of bit of work of the day then, and kind of picking up on that kind of inspired into action. We're going to have some more workshops now. Can I ask you to just stop sharing your screen, Katie, so that we don't all get to read your emails? Thanks. Perfect. In a couple of minutes, we're going to split up into breakout groups again, and this time what we'd like you to think about is just kind of what you've had during today that you are going to take away, and that you can use in your trust and in your kind of network to really make sure that you're ensuring your own excellence and being innovative and building a better post-COVID world. So if you kind of think about the things we've talked about today, we've thought about local things. So we've heard about the excellence coming out of Homerton, particularly with kind of innovations around teaching and how to kind of share that information. We've thought about how to create better environments for bullying and undermining, how to sort of use our communication skills to make sure that we don't ever create a hostile working environment. We've thought about how we can have better supervision and how we can create training placements that kind of are idealized to what people want to learn. And then we've also then thought about our kind of global innovations in the afternoon. So we've been thinking about how we can tackle child poverty, inequality, and then thinking about the climate and sort of the future of the planet. So what I would like, Nisha's going to split us into groups in a bit, but if each group could think of one local thing and one global thing that they're going to try and think about. So a local thing that you can kind of implement in your current placement, something that you might want to try and change, or something you think you could improve. And then if you think of something that is kind of related to one of our global themes, that is something else that you could try and implement or at least explore further. And then we'll ask each group to just feedback one of their best local ideas and one of their best global ideas. If we say, so it's just coming up to 4:15 now, if we say that we'll be back by just before 4, and then we can try and finish things up so that we can get away to STC meetings. So if we say coming back at 4:45, does that sound okay, Nisha? Perfect. So in a second, I think there'll be magic and we'll all be split out into groups, and then we'll see you back here at 4:45.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Yasmin's not there, so there'll be one of your rooms which doesn't have anyone to lead it.
Oh dear.
I don't know where she is. She's not on this list. Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Nisha. Sorry, I was trying to see if I could work out where she'd gone. We might have to kick her people into another group. Is that possible, or is that really difficult?
No, that's fine.
Or what about just someone in that group could facilitate? You could just someone in that group would just have to be the group leader. That's fine.
Yeah,
probably easier.
Not, yeah.
Who's who we lost first? Is it me or someone else?
No, it's Jasmine.
I don't know where she is.
Someone in, if there's no one in your group who says they're meant to be the facilitator, then you have to, someone has to step forward.
Someone's innovation can be to take on a leadership role.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, let me just start the rooms then. So everyone will be put into a room. Hopefully soon. Also, Richard, you're sharing your screen. I hope that was intentional, Richard.
He was about to draw us a picture, maybe.
Maybe. Right. You should all be slowly going. Sorry, my computer's being very slow right now.